April 12, 1940-5, Chaffee Forward Headquarters, Reims, France. General Dwight D. Eisenhower sits alone in his office, reviewing casualty reports from the Ruhr pocket. The numbers are staggering. 70 to 3,000 German prisoners in a single week. But the cost to American forces weighs on him. Each name on the list represents a family back home who'll receive a telegram they'll never forget. The door bursts open. No knock. Colonel Ernest Tex Lee, normally composed, is out of breath. "Sir, urgent intelligence from Third Army." Eisenhower looks up, his blue eyes tired but sharp. "Patton's reached the Mulde River, sir. He's 50 miles from Berlin." Eisenhower stands, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. 50 miles? "Yes, sir. 12 corps crossed at Colditz this morning. Patton says his lead elements can be in Berlin within 48 hours. He's requesting permission to advance immediately." There's a pause. Eisenhower walks to the wall map, his hands clasped behind his back. Then Lee speaks again, his voice quieter. "There's something else, sir." A cable from the Prime Minister, marked most immediate. Eisenhower turns. "Churchill?" Lee nods. "He's demanding we take Berlin first, sir, before the Russians." If you want to understand the decisions that shape the world we live in today, hit that subscribe button for WW2 Elite. Because what happened in the next 9 days would determine not just who won the war, but who would control half of Europe for the next 50 years. Eisenhower takes the cable from Lee's hand. Churchill's words are direct, urgent, the tone unmistakable. This isn't a suggestion. It's a plea. Get me the situation map for Berlin, and find out exactly where the Soviets are. Within minutes, his war room fills with staff officers. Map sheet M709 is spread across the conference table. Red arrows mark American positions. Blue arrows show Soviet forces. Someone produces a ruler, 53 miles, General, from Patton's current position to Berlin's western outskirts. Eisenhower studies the map in silence. His intelligence chief, General Kenneth Strong, points to the eastern side of Berlin. "The Soviets are here, sir. The Oder River, approximately 35 miles from Berlin. But they've stalled. Our estimates show they've taken over 350,000 casualties in the past 3 weeks trying to break through Seelow Heights. And German defenses? Berlin is practically undefended from the west, General. Intelligence estimates maybe 25,000 Wehrmacht regulars and Volkssturm militia. Everything else has been moved east to face the Soviets. From the west, Berlin is wide open." Another officer speaks. "Sir, at Third Army's current advance rate of 15 to 20 miles per day, they could reach Berlin by April 14th or 15th. General Omar Bradley enters the room, having been summoned from 12th Army Group headquarters. Eisenhower turns to him immediately. "Brad, I need your assessment. Cold numbers. What would it cost us to take Berlin?" Bradley doesn't hesitate. He's already run the calculations. "Based on urban combat ratios from Aachen and other German cities, I estimate 100,000 casualties minimum. That's killed, wounded, and missing. Berlin is 883 square kilometers of urban terrain. Even with light resistance, street-by-street fighting in a city that size will bleed us dry." "And strategic value?" Bradley's answer is blunt. "None, sir. Berlin is a prestige target. The real strategic objective was the Ruhr industrial complex, which we've already captured. Berlin has been bombed to rubble. Its factories are destroyed. Its transportation networks are shattered. Militarily, it's worthless." Eisenhower's Chief of Staff, General Walter Bedell Smith, interjects. "But politically, General, I'm not a politician, Bedell. My job is to destroy the German Wehrmacht and end this war with minimum Allied casualties." Smith persists. "Sir, Churchill isn't wrong about where we stop matters. The Soviets won't give back territory they occupy." Eisenhower picks up Churchill's cable again. He reads one line aloud. "If we don't take Berlin, Stalin will control all of Eastern Europe for the next century." The room falls silent. Everyone understands the implication. This isn't just about capture, it's about the map of post-war Europe. Bradley speaks carefully. "General, we agreed with the Soviets at Yalta that Berlin falls within their occupation zone. We have that in writing. If we take Berlin now, we're reneging on an agreement with an ally. An agreement Stalin will ignore the moment it suits him," someone mutters. Eisenhower turns to his communications officer. "Get me a secure line to London. I need to speak with the Prime Minister." What Eisenhower didn't know was that this conversation would become one of the most consequential of the entire war. Not because of military strategy, but because two men would argue about something far bigger: whether winning the war against Germany was the end or just the beginning of something worse. The secure line to 10 Downing Street takes 20 minutes to establish. Eisenhower sits in his private office, the telephone receiver heavy in his hand. At precisely 6:45 p.m., Churchill's voice crackles through. General Eisenhower. I trust you've received my cables. I have, Mr. Prime Minister. Then you understand the urgency. Patton is 50. The Russians are stalled. General, this is our moment. We must seize it. Eisenhower chooses his words carefully. Sir, Berlin lies within the Soviet occupation zone as agreed upon at Yalta. We have that understanding in writing, signed by President Roosevelt, yourself, and Marshal Stalin. Churchill's response is immediate, his voice rising. Agreements can be revised based on military realities. Eisenhower, once the Russians take Berlin, they will never leave Eastern Europe. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, all of it. You're not just handing them a city, you're handing them half a continent, Mr. Tesla Demon. Prime Minister, my intelligence estimates 100,000 American casualties to take Berlin. The city is 800 square kilometers of urban terrain. We'd be fighting street by street, building by building. For what strategic gain? Strategic gain? Churchill's voice thunders through the line. Political gain, General. When this war ends, there will be a new map of Europe, either drawn by those who fought to the last city, or dictated by those who stopped 50 miles short because of a gentleman's agreement with Stalin. Eisenhower's jaw tightens. He respects Churchill immensely, but he won't be lectured on military strategy. Sir, with respect, I'm a military commander. My job is to destroy the German armed forces with minimal Allied casualties and end this war. Berlin is a prestige target. The real objective was the Ruhr industrial area, which we've already captured. German military capacity is finished. There's a long pause. When Churchill speaks again, his voice has changed. Lower, more personal. General, I have seen the intelligence reports on what the Soviets do in occupied territory, the arrests, the deportations, the political purges. When we shake hands with them in Berlin, and mark my words, we will shake hands, I want that handshake to happen as far east as possible. Every mile matters. Every single mile. Eisenhower closes his eyes briefly. I understand your concerns, Prime Minister. I do. But I answer to General Marshall and President Truman. The decision has been made. Berlin goes to the Russians. Then I will appeal to President Truman directly. That is your prerogative, sir. Another pause, longer this time. When Churchill speaks again, the thunder is gone. What remains is something sadder. Eisenhower, in 10 years, we'll all look back at this moment. I pray your decision is vindicated by history. But I fear it will haunt. I fear it deeply. I understand, sir. The line goes dead. Eisenhower sets the receiver down slowly. He stares at the map on his wall, at the red line marking the Molde River. His finger traces westward from Berlin, across Poland, through the Baltic states, territory that would fall to Soviet control. General Smith enters quietly. Sir? Eisenhower doesn't turn around. Get me Bradley. Tell him to issue orders to Patton immediately. Third Army is to hold. Berlin is off limits. Make it clear, Bedell. Not negotiate. Not slow down. Halt. Yes, sir. As Smith leaves, Eisenhower remains at the map, alone with a decision that will echo through history. But someone else, and he was about to make everything much more complicated. April 13th, 1945, 0800 hours. Third Army Headquarters, Hersfeld. General George S. Patton stands in his command tent, reading the halt order that just came through from 12th Army Group. His face reddens. His legendary temper, barely controlled on good days, erupts. Like hell, we're stopping. His staff officers exchange glances. Everyone knows what's coming. We fought from Normandy to here, through the hedgerows across France, through the Bulge across the Rhine. Now they want us to stop and watch Stalin parade through the Brandenburg Gate. His Chief of Staff, Colonel Paul Harkins, speaks carefully. Sir, the order comes directly from General Eisenhower. I don't care if it comes from God Almighty. We're 50 miles from Berlin. 50 miles. We can end this war in 48 hours. Patton slams the order down on the table. He walks to his own map, jabbing his finger at Berlin. You know what this is? Pure politics. Ike's afraid of offending Stalin. Well, I'm not. I'm a soldier, and soldiers finish what they start. General, what are your orders? Patton's response would later be recorded in multiple memoirs and official reports. He turns to his staff with that famous predatory grin. Tell 12 Corps to continue reconnaissance in force. We're not advancing Tesla. We're probing. Big difference. And if some of those reconnaissance units happen to probe their way to Berlin, well, that's just good initiative. By nightfall, elements of the 83rd Infantry Division are 45 miles from Berlin. Still probing, back at 12th Army Group, Bradley receives reports of Patton's movements. He picks up the phone immediately. The call connects to 3rd Army headquarters. Patton's voice is defiant before Bradley even speaks. Brad, before you say anything. This comes from Eisenhower himself. Halt. Not slow down, not reconnaissance. Halt. Pull your lead elements back to the mold. That's a direct order. Brad, for God's sake, we're winning. You're going to let politics stop us 50 miles short? Bradley's voice hardens. It's not politics, it's casualties. Ike estimates 100,000 men to take that. 100,000, George. Is a pile of rubble worth that? Though when Patton speaks again, his voice is low, dangerous. Some things are worth dying for, Brad. Berlin is the head of the snake. You cut off the head, the body dies. That's how you win wars. George, I need your word. Will you comply with this order? Another long silence. You'll have my compliance, Brad, but you won't have my agreement. This is a mistake. History will prove it. Maybe. But it's the decision that's been made. Pull your units back. He turns to Harkins. Issue the recall. Bring everyone back to the Moldy. Yes, sir. As his staff files out, Patton opens his personal diary. The entry he writes that night will be discovered decades later. The words are bitter, prophetic. We could have had Berlin and saved Europe from Stalin. Instead, we're stopping at the Molde and letting history slip through our fingers. This decision will haunt us for generations. But Patton wasn't the only one refusing to accept defeat. In London, Churchill was preparing his final gambit, one that would bypass military channels entirely and go straight. April 15, 1945. Churchill composes a cable to President Harry Truman, who had assumed office just 3 days earlier after Roosevelt's sudden death. The cable is marked personal and top secret. Churchill's language is urgent, almost desperate. The Russian armies will no doubt overrun all Austria and enter Vienna. If they also take Berlin, will not their impression that they have been the overwhelming contributor to our common victory be unduly imprinted in their minds? And may this not lead them into a mood which will raise grave and formidable difficulties in the future. The cable sits on Truman's desk in the White House. The new president, still finding his footing, consults with his military advisors. General George Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, is unequivocal. Mr. President, General Eisenhower is Supreme Commander for a reason. He has full authority over military operations in Europe. This is not a political decision. It's a military one. And militarily, Berlin is not worth 100,000 American lives. Truman's response to Churchill takes 6 hours. When it arrives in London, it's polite but firm. Eisenhower has full authority as Supreme Commander. Political considerations are secondary to military efficiency. The halt. Churchill reads it in his office at 10 Downing Street. His private secretary later records that the Prime Minister sat in silence for nearly an hour afterward, staring at the map of Europe on his wall. But what happened next would prove Churchill's fears weren't paranoia. They were prophecy. April 16, 1945. 3 o'clock in the morning. The Silo Heights, 35 miles east of Berlin. Marshal Georgy Zhukov launches the Soviet assault that will become the largest artillery barrage in human history. 2.5 million men, 6,250 tanks, 41,600 artillery pieces. The sound is heard in Berlin itself. The ground shakes like an earthquake. By 900 hours, Western intelligence reports reach SHAEF headquarters. The Soviets have broken through. The stalled offensive is over. Berlin's fate is sealed. Eisenhower receives the reports in his office. General Strong briefs him on the scope of the assault. Sir, Soviet forces are advancing 10 to 15 kilometers per day. German resistance is collapsing. We estimate Soviet entry into Berlin by April 19th or 20th. Casualties? Soviet casualties are estimated at 20,000 in the first 24 hours. German casualties are unknown, but certainly higher. Eisenhower walks to his map. The blue Soviet arrows are moving westward. The red American arrow sits 53 miles away. At 3rd Army headquarters, Patton receives the same intelligence. His response is recorded by multiple witnesses. He throws a whiskey glass against the wall of his command tent and storms out without a word. His diary entry that day is scathing. "We could have been there first. Now we'll watch the Reds raise their hammer and sickle over the Reichstag while American boys sit on the Mold River picking their noses. History will not forgive this." In London, Churchill cables Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden with barely concealed anguish. "The Russians are about to take Berlin. We have halted 50 miles away. I fear we shall see the consequences of this decision for decades to come." But not everyone agreed the decision was wrong. At 12th Army Group headquarters, Bradley defended the strategy to his staff. "We made the right call. Let the Russians pay the butcher's bill for Berlin. We'll take Hamburg and Prague with a fraction of the casualties." That's sound military strategy. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, commanding British 21st Army Group, offered a more nuanced view in his private correspondence. "Perhaps we've been too cautious. Berlin in Allied hands would have given us considerable leverage in post-war negotiations, but hindsight is always clearer than foresight. The arguments raged through Allied command, but the decision was final, or so everyone thought, because on April 18th, Churchill sent one final cable to Eisenhower. Not demanding, not arguing, just asking, "General, I am watching the Russian advance on Berlin with grave concern. Whatever your decision, I respect it, but I must ask, when the history of this moment is written, what will you tell them we were thinking?" Eisenhower reads the cable 3 times. He dictates a response to his secretary, but then crumples it up. He dictates another, crumples that one too. Finally, he speaks to General Smith. "What's Churchill's schedule?" "Sir, is he in London?" "Send a message to 10 Downing Street. Tell the Prime Minister if he wants to discuss Berlin, I'm available for a meeting here in Raz, at his convenience." Smith looks surprised. "Sir, you're inviting him here?" "I am. This conversation needs to happen face to face, not through cables and phone lines. Face to face." 3 days later, something unprecedented happens. Something that wasn't in any operational plan or diplomatic protocol, and it would lead to the most important conversation of the entire war. April 21st, 1940, 1600 hours. A British aircraft lands at the airfield near Reims. No press, just a small security detail. Winston Churchill steps out, wearing his famous boiler suit and carrying a walking stick. At 70 years old, he looks exhausted. The weight of 6 years of war shows in every line of his face. Eisenhower is waiting on the tarmac. The 2 men shake hands. No formality, just 2 leaders who respect each other deeply, even when they disagree. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Prime Minister. Thank you for the invitation, General." They drive to Chef headquarters in silence. Inside Eisenhower's office, the door closes. No aides, no stenographers, just the 2 of them and a map of Europe. Churchill speaks first. His voice is tired but steady. "General, I'm not here to change your order. I know the decision is made." Patton is halted. "The Russians will take Berlin within the week. I've come to ask you one question." "Sir?" Churchill walks to the map. His finger traces across Eastern Europe. "When Soviet tanks are rolling through Prague, Warsaw, and Budapest 5 years from now, when Stalin refuses to hold elections in Poland like he promised at Yalta, when we realize we've traded Hitler's tyranny for Stalin's tyranny, what will you say?" The question hangs in the air. Eisenhower stands, walks to the window. Outside, American soldiers are going about their duties, young men who want to go home. He turns back to Churchill. "I'll say that I saved 100,000 American lives. I'll say that I ended the war in Europe 6 weeks faster than if we'd gotten bogged down in Berlin. And I'll say that preventing World War III isn't a general's job, it's a statesman's job." Churchill's eyes narrow. "And if I told you that preventing World War III begins with where we stop in this one?" Eisenhower meets his gaze steadily. "Then I'd say, Mr. Prime Minister, that this is why I'm a general, and you're a Prime Minister. I deal with the war in front of me. You deal with the war that comes up." Churchill nods slowly. He walks to the chair across from Eisenhower's desk and sits heavily. "You know what frightens me most, General? Not that you're wrong, but that you might be right about the military aspects and I might be right about the political consequences. And both truths will exist simultaneously, making this one of those decisions history will debate for a century." "That's possible, sir. Do you understand what Stalin will do in Eastern Europe?" Eisenhower's voice is firm. "I understand what he might do, but I know with certainty what will happen if I send American troops into Berlin. 100,000 casualties, maybe more. Mothers burying sons for a city that has no strategic value? I won't. Churchill stands, extending his hand. History will judge us both, General. I suspect you'll sleep better than I will. They shake hands. But as Churchill reaches the door, he pauses, turns back. What he says next would be recorded by Eisenhower in his private notes, discovered decades after both men were dead. General Eisenhower, you're quite right that this is a political matter, not a military one. But let me tell you something I've learned in 40 years of political life. He pauses. The room is absolutely silent. Military decisions that ignore political consequences don't end wars. They simply set the stage for the next one. Eisenhower stands from his desk. His voice is respectful but unyielding. With respect, sir, military decisions that sacrifice soldiers for political leverage turn commanders into politicians. And I won't do that. Not for Berlin, not for anyone. Churchill nods slowly. His expression is unreadable. Then God help us both. The door closes. Eisenhower stands alone in his office. Outside, he can hear Churchill's car starting, the engine fading into the distance. General Smith enters quietly. Sir? Eisenhower doesn't turn from the Bedell. Do you think I made the right decision? Smith considers carefully. I think you made the decision a commanding general had to make, sir. That's not an answer? No, sir, it's not. Because I don't think there was a right answer, just different kinds of wrong. Eisenhower finally turned. Make sure the halt order is crystal clear to all units. No one crosses the mold. No exceptions. And Bedell, sir, document everything. Every communication, every order, every casualty estimate. When history judges this decision, I want the full picture available. Yes, sir. But the judgment of history would have to wait, because the war was about to reach its final devastating crescendo, and everyone would see just how high the price of Berlin really was. April 25, 1947-5, Soviet forces complete the encirclement of Berlin. 350,000 German defenders are trapped inside. 2.5 million Soviet troops surround the city. The final assault begins. At the Elbe River near Torgau, American and Soviet soldiers meet for the first time. The famous photograph is taken, Lieutenant Albert Kotzebue of the U.S. 69th Infantry Division shaking hands with Lieutenant Alexander Silvashko of the Soviet 58th Guards Rifle Division. Both men are smiling. Neither knows that the alliance they represent is already fracturing. The distance between them and Berlin, 53 miles. April 30th, 1945. Soviet forces are 300 meters from Hitler's bunker. The sound of artillery is constant. In his underground fortress, Adolf Hitler realizes the end has come. At 3:30 p.m., he commits suicide. His body is burned in the Reich Chancellery Garden. The Soviets are closing in, but the fighting continues for 2 more days. May 2nd, 1945. Berlin surrenders to the Soviet Union. General Helmuth Weidling, commander of the Berlin Defense Area, signs the surrender document. The battle is over. The final statistics are staggering. Soviet casualties, 80 to 1,000 killed, 280,000 wounded. German casualties, 92,000 killed, 220,000 wounded, 480,000 captured. American casualties at the Mulde River halt line minimal. The cost Eisenhower didn't pay. 100,000 American lives, maybe more. The soldiers who would have died in Berlin went home instead. They married, had children, built lives. Because of a decision made 50 miles away. But there was another cost. One that Churchill predicted with chilling accuracy. By 1948, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and East Germany were under Soviet control. Elections promised at Yalta were never held, or they were held as shams, with only communist candidates permitted. On March 5, 1946, Winston Churchill stood at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri. President Truman sat behind him on the stage. Churchill delivered the speech that would define the post-war world. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. The line on the map where that iron curtain fell, almost exactly where Allied forces had stopped in April 1945. The Mulde River became part of the border between East and West Germany. The place Patton was ordered to halt became the front line of the Cold War. For 46 years, Europe would remain divided, families separated, cities split. The Berlin Wall, built in 1961, would stand as a concrete monument to the consequences of decisions made in April 1945. So who was right? Eisenhower or Churchill? The answer is both. And neither. Eisenhower made a military decision based on sound strategic reasoning. Berlin had no military value. The casualties would have been catastrophic. American families were spared the telegrams that would have arrived by the thousands. Young men came home who would have died in the rubble of Berlin. That cannot be dismissed. But Churchill made a political prediction that proved devastatingly accurate. Where the Allies stopped mattered. Every mile mattered. The Soviets took everything they could reach and never gave it back. Eastern Europe paid the price for the next half-century. Was preventing Soviet dominance of Eastern Europe worth 100,000 American lives? That's not a military question. It's a moral one. And moral questions rarely have clean answers. Years later, in his memoir Crusade in Europe, published in 1948, Eisenhower defended his decision with characteristic clarity. I could see no political purpose in the capture of Berlin that would offset the need for quick destruction of the German army on the Western Front. The function of troops is to fight, not to occupy areas as bargaining pawns. But in his private diary, discovered decades after his death, he wrote something different, something more personal, something that revealed the weight he carried. Churchill may have been right about but if saving American lives makes me wrong, I'll take that burden to my... On April 30th, 1945, the day Hitler died, he wrote in his diary words that would prove eerily prophetic. We could have had Berlin and saved Europe from Stalin. Instead, we stopped at the Mulde River and let history slip through our fingers. This decision will haunt us for generations. He was right. The border pattern was ordered to halt at became the Iron Curtain, the place where Europe was split in two for nearly 50 years. The Berlin Wall fell on November 9, 1989. 44 years after the war ended, Germans from east and west climbed onto that wall and tore it down with hammers and bare hands. Families separated for decades were reunited. The Cold War, begun in part by decisions made in April 1945, was finally ending. But the debate over Eisenhower's decision continues to this day. Military historians generally support it. Political historians question it. The truth, as with most historic moments, is complex and layered. What we know for certain is this: the decision not to take Berlin was made by a commanding general trying to end a war with minimum loss of life. The consequences of that decision shaped global politics for half a century. Both things are true. Both matter. Eisenhower and Churchill never spoke publicly about their private meeting in Reims on April 21, 1945. Both men took the details to their graves, but the respect between them never wavered. When Eisenhower became president in 1953, Churchill was among the first world leaders to congratulate him. And when Churchill died in 1965, former President Eisenhower attended the funeral in London. He stood in the cold rain outside St. Juvenile Paul's Cathedral, tears on his face, as Churchill's coffin was carried past. Someone asked him later what he was thinking about. His answer was brief. I was thinking about a conversation in Reims 20 years ago, about a decision that neither of us could get completely right because there was no completely right answer. That might be the truest statement about the entire controversy. Sometimes in war, in leadership, in life, there is no right answer. There are only different kinds of consequences, different costs paid by different people. Eisenhower chose to pay the political cost to save American lives. Churchill warned about the political cost and was proven right. Both men were leaders of extraordinary courage and vision. Both made decisions based on what they believed was right, and both of them had to live with the consequences. The next time you hear about World War II, remember this: the war didn't end with clear victory and simple solutions. It ended with complex decisions that had ripple effects for decades. The generation that fought that war had to make choices none of us would want to face, and they did so, knowing history would judge them. We're still judging them today, and the debate continues. If you want to explore more untold stories from World War II, stories about the impossible decisions leaders faced and the consequences that shaped our world, subscribe to WW2 Elite. Hit that like button if this story made you think differently about the end of the war, and drop a comment. Do you think Eisenhower made the right call? Or should the Allies have taken Berlin regardless of the cost? Because that question, asked in April 1945, still matters today. The border where we stopped became the border where the world divided, and understanding why that happened helps us understand the world we inherited. Thanks for watching WW2 Elite. History isn't just it's about understanding why it happened, and sometimes that's the hardest question of all.